Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our next session, which is entitled On the Way to the UN Climate Conference COP28 in Dubai. My name is Anja Wehler-Schöck. I'm the international editor at Tagesspiegel, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Majid al-Suwaidi to our conversation this afternoon. Joining me from the UAE, welcome to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Anja. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm sure it's a very hectic time for you in the run-up of the COP, so we very much appreciate you taking the time to join us. Ambassador Suwaidi is the Director General of this year's COP, which is hosted by the United Arab Emirates. And he most recently served as his country's ambassador in Madrid, but he also has vast experience in climate diplomacy. He was the UAE's lead negotiator for the 2015 Paris Agreement, and he also played a key role in the design and adoption of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Ambassador, we are 2 weeks away from the start of the COP in Dubai. It seems that every year the COP is met with great expectations, but then the outcomes are limited and often disappointing. You are a seasoned climate diplomat and negotiator. You've seen your share of this. How can you assure that this year's COP won't be a disappointment?
Well, Anja, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the chance to be here. It's really a pleasure. I fully assure you that this year's COP will be one of the most exciting COPs that you've seen. It's true, though, that over the years, COPs really have changed in many ways. When I was in Paris, and I was, as you said, a lead negotiator for several years up to Paris. And the negotiations were really a political process, an intergovernmental negotiation with some of the private sector involved on the sidelines. The Green Zone wasn't a very active space, although, one that we saw a lot of work happening. But now, once we got that political outcome in Paris, and subsequently we've developed that outcome, we've seen that we've moved to a phase of implementation. And a phase of implementation by its nature requires the private sector, non-state actors, governmental actors at a state or subnational level, NGOs, civil society, indigenous people. It needs everybody to come on board and to help to deliver the results on the ground. And we know that what makes COP28 very exciting is that it's the first ever global stocktake. When we negotiated Paris, we put in place this first ever global stocktake for a reason, because we wanted to assess 7 years on and halfway to 2030 how we were doing on that outcome. Unfortunately, today we know that we're not on track to achieve 1.5 degrees. And what we have thought to ourselves as a COP28 team is, how do we make sure that this COP really delivers on getting us back on track to achieving that 1.5 degrees? That has been our North Star from the very beginning. And so we wanted to have a very practical and honest conversation about what are the real world things that we can do that can make a difference to get us back on track. As we've traveled around the world, and today I'm talking to you from India, we've left no stone unturned. We've spoken to governments, we've spoken to NGOs, we've spoken to civil society. We've spoken to everybody who will listen, frankly, who we will listen to. And we've heard those voices. And we came up with a 4-point plan. Our 4-point plan is fast-tracking the energy transition. How do we decarbonize the energy system we have today? But importantly, how do we rapidly scale up the new energy future that we want to have so people can make the choices that they need to make? Secondly, finance. Finance is a key thing that we heard time and time again, is that finance is just not flowing at the scale or to the right places or at the speed that we need it to. It's frankly neither available, accessible, or affordable. So we've really thought about how do we work on fixing finance, and we could talk a bit more about that later. And then putting people at the heart of the outcome, what we call our pillar on people, lives, and livelihoods. How do we make this relevant for the average woman, the average young person, the average indigenous person, the average farmer, the average person working in industry? How do we make this relevant and equitable and meaningful to the average person on the street? So that's And that's about mitigation, but that's also about the adaptation story. How do we look at food? How do we look at health? How do we look at allowing people to feel part of this process and empowered by it? And then the last pillar is that inclusivity part that I talked about at the beginning. We can't solve these problems in isolation. We need to make sure that everybody's present, everybody's part of the conversation, that we value and include everyone's proposals and ideas and suggestions, and then we bring all of those together in a common effort. We unite and we act and we deliver.
Thank you so much for this overview, Ambassador. I want to come back to some of the topics that you mentioned, but before that, you mentioned that the COP today is less focused on politics and more on implementation. But we cannot deny the fact that the COP is taking place now against the backdrop of a war in the Middle East and also the continuing war in Ukraine and many other conflicts that are waging around the world. What impact do these tensions between states have on climate negotiations?
Our team is really focused on delivering a COP and focused on the delivery of results. We as a country, of course, do not want to, are keen to see de-escalation of conflicts. We want to protect civilian lives. Our team is focused on how do we deliver a COP. Your question is how does that affect, how does that global politics affect the COP process? From what we see and from where I sit, the engagement has only increased. We've only seen more involvement from governments. I can tell you that we are going to have the largest number of heads of state present than any COP in history. We are going to have the largest number of stakeholders present and involved than any COP in history. We know already that this is going to be one of the largest, most inclusive COPs that we've seen. But to your point, and I think that what I think is that climate change is one of those areas where we need multilateralism. It's an area where we need to come together because, of course, the climate has no boundaries. We could do all the great work and effort that we do today in the UAE, but that won't impact the climate problem without that work happening across the world by partners together. And so the COP provides a moment for us to bring people together, to have conversations, to start to see each other face to face and in an equal way and in an equitable way, and to start to have those conversations that we need to have about how do we practically move forward. And I think that COP28 really lends an opportunity to show that we as a global community can come together around an issue that, by the way, we all agree on, an issue that we all are motivated by. You know, we've seen announcements just this week from our COP presidents' engagements in Brussels and the European Union talking about how it's going to be being present and active at COP28. We've seen China and the US working together and coming forward with a statement saying that they want to come together to deliver at COP28. We have interfaith leaders coming. We have business community coming. We have NGOs. I think this could be a real celebration of the power of multilateralism, and it can be a real celebration of what we can do as a planet when we come together to try to deliver, to tackle real challenges.
Thank you. So one significant breakthrough of last year's COP in Sharm el-Sheikh was the agreement on a fund to compensate vulnerable and poorer countries for the loss and damage that they experienced due to climate change. On Monday, Wopke Hoekstra, the EU's climate commissioner, said that the EU was ready to announce a substantial financial contribution for a new climate damage fund. What results do you expect from COP on loss and damage, and what could such a fund look like?
Well, first of all, I think that we should all be excited and celebrate this announcement by the EU. I think that we should be really applauding them for stepping up and making that early pledge. That's something that was, our COP president really engaged with the EU, and we feel very, we want to celebrate them and applaud them. I think that we don't do enough of applauding good things and success, so we should do that. We were really pleased to announce that we, after the fourth transitional committee meeting back in, I think it was September, or October, we felt that there was no progress. So we as the UAE decided to add this exceptional additional meeting of the Transitional Committee number 5, which we held here in Abu Dhabi. We worked hard with the different parties. We were able to get them to come together and deliver an outcome. And so we have an outcome that can be approved at COP28. So that's an amazing outcome. I think we need to look at how we move forward, how we get those early pledges. So I think that on the loss and damage fund, we're in a really great place. And I'm positive that this is going to be one of the key celebrations at COP28.
Mm-hmm. So one of the disappointments at Sharm el-Sheikh was that no agreement could be reached on an unabated departure from oil and gas. You're from a country which has generated most of its wealth from these resources. Can the UAE play a leading role in furthering an agreement on fossil fuel phase-out?
Sharm el-Sheikh, I think, delivered a lot of progress, and I think that we should thank our Egyptian presidents for the hard work that they delivered there. Look, we all know that these issues are challenging for many countries. We are a country that has been able to build our economy off of fossil fuels, as have many countries, in fact, and many COP presidencies before us have been fossil fuel nations. And this is something that what we're saying is that this is about how do we have these practical conversations about how we move forward. We as a country have taken leadership on this. We have diversified our economy. Today, 70% of our economy is non-oil and gas. That's a pathway that our leadership has really strived for. Our president, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, is famous for saying that he wants to celebrate that last barrel of oil that we deliver, in that we will be ready for that future that we all want to see. And our COP president has talked about how the phase out of fossil fuels is inevitable. But we can't move forward if we don't address the challenges that many countries are facing, many industries are facing, and that's both in the developed and the developing world. We know we've seen from the past few years the energy challenges that are faced across the world. We know that fossil fuels are part of the energy mix, even up to 2050. How do we do that in a responsible and effective way that helps us to get to the 1.5-degree goal that we have? And that's been our North Star. The COP process and the Paris Agreement is about achieving keeping global temperatures under 1.5 degrees. How do you do that? You do that by addressing the emissions gap. The emissions gap is that 22 gigatons of emissions. What are you going to do to do that? Part of that is on the energy mix. And I said to you, our first pillar has always been the focus on energy. We think that the best way to do that is to focus on decarbonizing the energy system we have today, while we ramp up and scale up and speed up the new energy system of the future. And that's why we have a tripling of renewable energy target, doubling of hydrogen, doubling of energy efficiency. We need to be pulling all the stops to try to build that energy system of the future that we all want to see. And that can only be done if we have the right finances in place, we have the right mechanisms. And finances is, I hope, something we can talk about, because that's a really important component of this. And then the next part of the emissions is around food and agriculture and all of these other, the hard to abate sectors like industry, like aviation, like transportation. We need to address all of the above. So yes, it's important to address the energy system, and that's what we're going to deliver at COP28. We have some really meaningful outcomes. But I want to stress, that's going to come from two parts. That's going to come from the negotiated outcome. We need the negotiators to step up. We need countries to step up. We need everybody to come forward and say, these are the things that we're going to do to address emissions. And then it also will come from the private sector. It will come from civil society. It will come from each of us in our homes being energy efficient or making the choices for clean energy. We need to start to think about what are those practical solutions that allow the average person who's making a choice about their energy needs to make the choices that are cleaner and greener and affordable to them in an equitable way.
You mentioned the significance of climate finance. That's actually something that I wanted to ask you about. It's one of the cross-cutting themes of this year's COP, intertwined with climate transition and adaptation. What would be an effective financial strategy in your eyes?
This is something that we heard time and time again when we traveled around the world. It was very interesting because we would go on the one side and they would hear there was lots of capital but no projects, or we would go to the other side and hear there were lots of projects but no capital. And we really were like, well, what's the problem here? It sounds like there's lots of money. It sounds like there's lots of projects. So how are these two things coming together? And when we really deep dived into this, what we found was that the issue is not really a lack of money or projects, although in part that is part of it. It's really a systemic issue. It's an issue that our international financial system was designed for a post-World War and then a development agenda. And what we're talking about now is a new economy, a green economy, a new climate economy. And we need to reorient, sometimes reform, sometimes create new things that allow us to refocus our finance, and that's about reform of the international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the multilateral development banks. It's about governments putting in place the right policies, the right investment environments. It's about mobilizing capital at scale, and then by governments. And that's why we called on countries to deliver the 100 billion that was promised. We had a 100 billion pledge that was promised 14 years ago, has never been delivered. We need to show that trust and that good faith. It's about delivering on the 100, on the loss and damage fund. It's about doubling adaptation finance. Those are the trust factors. But then how do we move from that to the trillions of dollars of investment that we need to see? We need to go from hundreds of billions to 2 to 4 trillion in investment. We can only do that if we mobilize the private sector. And we need to mobilize the private sector at scale. So how do we find those solutions that really push and speed up the mobilization of private sector finance?
What role do you anticipate for the Global South to play at the COP? Do you think that there will be a concerted action, maybe from the BRICS state or from another group?
Well, we are a Global South country. This is a Global South COP. We're very proud of the actions that we take as the UAE, but we're also very proud of the actions that many Global South countries are taking, sometimes in very difficult and challenging situations. Many countries are suffering the brunt of climate change. They were the least contributing to it and are the least able to deal with it, but are making every effort to try to adapt and to take the mitigation actions they need, but don't have access to the finances that they need. Many large Global South countries are taking significant actions to deliver, to reduce their emissions and to take step forwards. I think that many are taking a leadership role in this. But we can't deny the fact that countries need to also meet their economic goals and aspirations and to lift people out of poverty. We don't live in isolation, right? We need to think about how we do that. And by the way, that's not a Global South problem or a Global North problem. That's a common problem. We all need to think about how we develop and grow our economies. How do we create opportunities for young people? How do we allow people from sectors who need to change jobs to new sectors? How do we train them? How do we give them those opportunities? How do we do that in an equitable way? How do we empower women? How do we empower young people? All of these things are issues that we all share, that we all face. And in many ways, it's not a Global South or a Global North problem. It's an all of us problem, and we need to come together and unite, and that's the only way we're going to be able to deliver this.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the inclusion of young people, and inclusion is one of the themes also of this year's COP. I wanted to ask you a final question. Protests by young climate activists have been stirring much controversy here in the West. What space will these young voices be given at COP?
I can tell you with confidence that we are giving unprecedented voice to young people. We took the initiative at the beginning of the year, and I just want to stress that this really comes from our national experience. In the UAE, we had one of the first and the youngest youth ministers in the UAE, Her Excellency Shem al-Mazroui, who we appointed to be our youth climate champion. And she's now moved to another ministry, so she's our Minister of Development, but still passionate about young people and experience, because in the UAE, we have a large population of young people. And many years ago, we appointed this youth minister to look at how do we include young people in the governmental process, in the process of developing our country. And she was very successful at that. We've taken that national story and we've put it on the global stage. What we've said is that we want to have a youth champion at the COP. We've requested parties to help us to approve representation of a youth champion in the climate process formally. And she has been spending her year going around the world working with youth groups, youth activists. We have 100 youth program to bring that was massively oversubscribed to bring 100 youth from around the world, particularly from least developed countries and small island states, to participate in COP. We've called on every party to have youth representation in their programs. I believe that we have been as active as, unprecedented as a COP presidency in terms of pushing young people and having them be part of the conversation and present in the conversation and in a meaningful way, not just in the tokenistic way we've seen in the past. And I'm excited that at COP28 you're going to see that. Look, we understand that lots of people, that COPs have the activists, they have the advocates, they have those who are passionate about the subject. We believe that they drive ambition. They allow us to get as an ambitious outcome as possible, and we welcome them. We want them to come to COP. We also believe that it's important to have people who can make the choices about how to change our economy for the better, to make the policies, and have those two groups talking together and coming up hopefully with really powerful ideas and initiatives that will deliver the outcomes that we all want to see. And that's why we've really pushed on making sure that we have as inclusive a COP as possible, because we believe that if we bring these people together, we refer to it as actionism. If we bring people together, if we bring them to the conversations together in the right place, in the right areas, that we can come up with really great ideas that allow us to tackle these big challenges.
Ambassador, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We wish you best of luck for the final preparations of this year's COP, and we're very excited to see the outcomes of the big conference. There will be Tagesspiegel journalists in attendance, so we'll hear from them firsthand. Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you. Thank you very much.